In the shadow of towering oaks, a young woman's desperate sobs pierce the dawn silence. 8 months pregnant and bound in iron chains, Sarah Matthews faces the cruel judgment of Paradise Valley's self-appointed moral guardians. The village council, driven by ancient prejudices, has condemned her unborn child as illegitimate. As the rising sun paints the Montana sky, they prepare to carry out their merciless sentence. But fate has other plans. The thundering hooves of a lone horse break the morning stillness as James Harrison, the region's wealthiest rancher, returns. From his distant estate, his arrival will shatter their righteous façade and challenge decades of unchallenged authority. But what drives a powerful man to risk everything for a stranger's fate? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Sarah Matthews had never imagined herself in such circumstances, not in her 26 years of careful living. The worn letter in her apron pocket, its creases deep from countless readings, served as a bitter reminder of how quickly life could shift course. Just 6 months ago, she had stood before her classroom at Paradise Valley's only schoolhouse, guiding young minds through the intricacies of arithmetic and literature. The daughter of a Methodist minister who had passed too young, Sarah had inherited his love of learning and commitment to service. Her mother, gone even earlier to consumption, had left her with an unshakable faith in human goodness, a faith now tested daily. The small cottage where she had grown up, filled with books and her father's sermons, still stood at the edge of town, though she hadn't set foot in it since the council's first judgment 3 months ago. Thomas Edwards had arrived in Paradise Valley on a crisp autumn morning, his merchant wagon laden with fabrics and sundries from the eastern states. Distinguished by his educated manner and worldly stories, he brought color to their monochrome world. Sarah found herself drawn to their conversations about literature and philosophy during his weekly visits to restock the schoolhouse's supplies. Temporary arrangement, he had called his regular stops in Paradise Valley, just until the railroad expands westward. But in those moments beneath the schoolhouse's maple tree during lunch hours, Sarah had dared to imagine permanence. His promises, like the fancy ribbon he had given her, proved just as decorative and ultimately meaningless. The revelation of her pregnancy coincided with Thomas's last scheduled visit to the valley. She had planned to share the news, hoping, perhaps naively, that it would anchor him to their small community. Instead, she found only his assistant manning the wagon, bearing a hastily scrawled note about urgent business eastward and vague promises of return. The council's reaction had been swift and merciless. Led by Elder Montgomery, they had gathered, like storm clouds on a summer evening. "We've maintained moral standards in this valley for 3 generations, Montgomery had declared during that first meeting, his wire-rimmed spectacles catching the lamplight. "We cannot allow such flagrant disregard for propriety to poison our youth." Sarah's position at the schoolhouse became untenable as parents, following the council's lead, began withdrawing their children. "How can we trust our daughters to the guidance of a woman of questionable virtue?" they whispered, though many of these same people had praised her teaching just weeks before. She had weathered the initial storms, the dismissal from her position, the whispers that followed her through town, the gradual isolation as former friends found reasons to cross the street when they saw her approaching. Even then, she had maintained her dignity, holding her head high as her father had taught her. "Your worth," he had often said, "is measured by God, not by the judgment of men." But now, as dawn approached and the rough bark of the oak tree pressed against her back, Sarah felt the full weight of her community's condemnation. The chains binding her to the tree were cold against her skin, a physical manifestation of the social bonds that had slowly tightened around her these past months. Through the thin fabric of her dress, she could feel her child moving, restless, as if sensing her distress. This innocent life, deemed illegitimate by those who claimed to speak for morality, had become her source of strength. Each kick and flutter reminded her that regardless of the council's judgment, this child was a blessing, not a curse. In the growing light, Sarah could make out the silhouettes of the council members gathering at the edge of the clearing. Their shadows stretched long across the frost-covered grass, like accusatory fingers pointing toward her. The morning air carried whispers of their final deliberations, words like example and necessity drifting on the breeze. The leather-bound ledger in Elder Montgomery's study told stories that Paradise Valley preferred to forget. Its pages, yellowed with age and stained with coffee rings, documented 30 years of the council's moral guidance. Montgomery often sat in his high-backed chair, running his finger down the neat columns of judgment, satisfaction evident in his thin-lipped smile. The council had begun as a necessity in the valley's early days, when law was distant and order needed maintaining. 5 men, a merchant, a preacher, a doctor, and 2 ranchers, had formed the first council in 1848. Their initial purpose was simple: resolve disputes, maintain peace, and protect the community's interests. But power, once tasted, has a way of demanding more. Today's council bore little resemblance to that practical beginning. Under Montgomery's leadership, it had evolved into something more insidious. The current members, Montgomery himself, banker Harris, general store owner Peterson, and the brothers William and Joseph Clark, wielded their authority like a scythe, cutting down anything they deemed improper. The ledger recorded their victories. The Warner boy, sent to a distant relative after his father's drinking, became an embarrassment. Widow Thompson, pressured to sell her land at a fraction of its worth after refusing to marry Peterson's cousin. The Miller family, driven out after questioning the council's authority during last year's drought relief distribution. Each case had been presented as necessary for the community's moral fabric. Each had been accepted with the same quiet resignation, and that now greeted Sarah's punishment. The council's power lay not in legal authority, they had none, but in the community's willing submission to their judgment. Montgomery had orchestrated Sarah's downfall with particular satisfaction. A woman of education, presenting independent thoughts to impressionable minds, had long troubled him. Her situation had provided the perfect opportunity to reassert the council's authority while removing what he saw as a subtle threat to traditional values. The council members gathered now in the pre-dawn chill, their breath forming clouds in the autumn air. William Clark clutched a newer ledger, its pages crisp and ready to record today's proceedings. The council had spent weeks deliberating Sarah's punishment, though the outcome had never been in doubt. This goes beyond mere moral correction. Montgomery had argued in their private meetings, we must make an example that will be remembered. The valley's youth need to understand the consequences of defying our traditional values. The others had nodded, each remembering how their own power rested on the foundation of such examples. Peterson, usually the most moderate voice, had suggested allowing Sarah to leave the valley quietly. She has family in Ohio, he'd offered, tentatively, but Montgomery had dismissed the idea with a wave of his hand. Exile is too gentle. This requires a public demonstration of our resolve. The punishment they had chosen, chaining a pregnant woman to the valley's oldest oak tree overnight, followed by a public declaration of her sins at dawn, was unprecedented in its cruelty. Yet each council member had convinced himself of its necessity. They had wrapped their personal prejudices and desire for control in the cloak of moral authority for so long that they could no longer distinguish between the two. As they waited for first light, none spoke of the uneasy dreams that had plagued them the night before. None mentioned the whispered concerns of their wives or the troubled glances from their children. They stood instead in self-righteous silence, drawing comfort from their shared conviction in their own authority. The ledger's newest entry would record their triumph, or so they believed. None of them, not even Montgomery with his calculating mind, could have predicted how this morning would mark not their greatest display of power, but the beginning of its end. The thundering hooves. Approaching in the distance would soon write a very different entry in Paradise Valley's history. James Harrison's ranch deed, framed in dark walnut and hanging in his study, covered more territory than most men could ride in a day. The elaborate calligraphy detailed the boundaries of the Double H Ranch, from the North Fork of Paradise Creek to the western ridge of Thunder Mountain. It was more than a legal document. It was the foundation of his quiet authority in a valley that had nearly forgotten him during his 15-year absence. At 52, Harrison cut an imposing figure, astride his black stallion as he crested the final hill overlooking Paradise Valley. Dawn painted the sky in shades of purple and gold, but his attention was drawn to the cluster of figures gathered beneath the old oak tree. Even from this distance, something about their arrangement struck him as wrong. A dark blot on the pastoral scene, he remembered. His return had been prompted by a letter from his ranch foreman describing troubling changes in the valley. "The council's getting above itself," old Pete had written in his cramped hand. "They're not just settling disputes anymore. They're ruling like kings, and mean ones at that." Harrison had dismissed it as exaggeration until more letters followed, each painting a darker picture than the last. The years away had been necessary. After Catherine's death, the valley had held too many memories, each corner of the ranch house echoing with her absence. He'd traveled, invested wisely, and built connections that stretched from Montana Territory to Washington, D.C., but he'd never sold an acre of the Double H, maintaining it as carefully as he maintained the pocket watch Catherine had given him. On their first anniversary, as he urged his horse down the hillside, details of the scene below became clearer. The figure bound to the tree was a woman, her condition obvious even at this distance. Harrison's jaw tightened. In all his years, through all the harsh realities of frontier life, he'd never seen such a display in Paradise Valley. The council members turned at the sound of his approach, their expressions shifting from righteous satisfaction to uncertainty. Harrison had been gone long enough that the younger ones knew him only by reputation, but Elder Montgomery's face showed recognition, and a flash of concern quickly masked. "James Harrison," Montgomery called out, recovering his composure. "Providence brings you home at an interesting moment. We're dealing with a matter of moral significance." His tone suggested that Harrison should ride on, that this was council business, and therefore beyond outside interference. Harrison dismounted smoothly, his boots raising small clouds of dust as they hit the ground. Time had silvered his dark hair and lined his face, but had done nothing to diminish his presence. "I see you're dealing with it by chaining a woman to a tree, Montgomery. Explain to me how that qualifies as moral." The other council members shifted uneasily. Harrison's tone was quiet, almost conversational, but carried an authority that made their own attempts at power seem hollow. His eyes moved from face to face, measuring each man, before settling on the woman. Despite her obvious distress, she met his gaze steadily. "Miss Matthews has violated the moral standards of this community," Montgomery began, but Harrison cut him off with a gesture. "The moral standards of this community." Harrison's voice remained calm, but carried to every corner of the clearing. "I remember when this valley's moral standards included compassion, dignity, and basic human decency. When exactly did they change to include torturing expectant mothers?" William Clark stepped forward, clutching his ledger like a shield. "Mr. Harrison, you've been gone a long time. Things have changed. The council has certain responsibilities." "The council," Harrison interrupted, "has no legal authority to chain anyone to anything." He moved toward the tree, his spurs ringing with each step. "And if you think property rights in this valley have changed during my absence, I suggest you review your maps. This oak stands on Double H land." The statement hung in the air like a thunderclap. Montgomery's face reddened. "Now see here, Harrison." "No, Montgomery, you see here." Harrison drew a folded document from his coat pocket, a copy of the ranch deed maintained for just such occasions. "Every acre from Paradise Creek to Thunder Mountain. I've let the council use this clearing for community gatherings out of courtesy. A courtesy I'm now revoking." He turned to the woman again, his voice softening. "Miss Matthews, I apologize for this violation of both law and decency on my property. With your permission, I'd like to help you." Sarah Matthews, who had watched this exchange with growing wonder, found her voice. "Thank you, Mr. Harrison." The words were simple but carried the weight of prayers answered. The broken chain link lay in the frost-covered grass, its jagged edges catching the morning light. It would remain there for years, a silent reminder of the day Paradise Valley's balance of power shifted. Harrison stood watch as his ranch hand, young Tommy Webber, worked at the chains with heavy iron cutters, borrowed from Peterson's store. Borrowed with a look that made it clear refusing wasn't an option. "Careful now," Harrison murmured as Tommy worked the cutters around the links nearest to Sarah's wrists. The metal was cold and unyielding, but Tommy's steady hands made quick work of it. Each snap of the cutters echoed through the clearing like gunshots, making the council members flinch. Sarah remained still during the process, though her arms had long since gone numb from the chain's embrace. She focused on Harrison's presence, solid, reassuring, unlike anything she'd experienced in the months since her world had begun to unravel. His shadow fell across her like a shield, blocking both the rising sun and the council's disapproving stares. Montgomery wasn't finished, though his usual commanding tone had acquired a desperate edge. "This is a mistake, Harrison. You've been gone too long. You don't understand what's at stake. The moral fabric of this community. The only thing at stake here, Montgomery," Harrison cut in, his voice arctic, "is whether you and your council will leave my property now, or if I'll have to make this situation more formal." His hand rested casually on his gun belt, not a threat, but a reminder that frontier justice still held sway when necessary. The last chain fell away, leaving angry red marks on Sarah's wrists. She swayed slightly, her legs unsteady after hours of standing. Harrison's hand appeared at her elbow, supporting her with gentle strength. The touch was impersonal, proper, yet it sent warmth flooding back into her chilled limbs. "My ranch house is about 3 miles from here," Harrison said softly, for her ears alone. "I have a housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, who's been with me for years. You'll be safe there if you choose to accept my hospitality." He paused, then added, "No obligations, no judgment." The council members had begun to retreat, their self-importance withering under Harrison's steady gaze. Only Montgomery remained, his thin face twisted with thwarted authority. "The community won't forget this, Harrison. There will be consequences." Harrison's reply carried across the clearing. "Yes, there will be. Though perhaps not the ones you're imagining." He turned to Tommy. "Fetch the buggy from Peterson's store. Miss Matthews shouldn't have to walk in her condition." His tone made it clear that Peterson would be lending his buggy just as readily as he had lent the cutters. As Tommy hurried off, Sarah found her voice. "Why?" The question was barely a whisper, but Harrison understood its depths. Why help a stranger? Why challenge the council? Why risk the community's censure? Harrison's eyes, when they met hers, held memories of old pain and older wisdom. "Because 15 years ago, I watched this valley turn its back on someone I loved, because good people did nothing then, myself included. Because sometimes, Miss Matthews, doing right isn't a choice, it's a duty." The sun had fully risen now, painting the valley in shades of promise. Sarah looked back at the oak tree, its ancient bark scarred by the chains. Something had broken here today, and something else had begun. The cold marks on her wrists would fade, but the memory of this morning, both its cruelty and its unexpected grace, would remain forever carved into her heart. As they waited for Tommy's return, Harrison maintained a protective stance between Sarah and the dispersing onlookers who had gathered to witness her humiliation, but had stayed to watch the council's authority crumble. Each face that turned away, each whispered conversation, each hurried departure marked another small shift in the valley's allegiances. The broken chain link caught the morning light one last time, before disappearing into the frost-covered grass. where it would remain as a marker of change, waiting to be discovered by future generations who would hear this story told and retold, each telling a reminder that even the strongest chains, whether physical or social, could be broken by the right combination of courage and compassion. The old map rustled softly as Harrison spread it across his saddle horn, its yellowed surface marked with careful annotations showing the vast expanse of the Double H Ranch. He rode alongside Peterson's buggy, where Sarah sat wrapped in a thick wool blanket, Tommy Webber handling the reins with careful attention to every bump and rut in the road. "We'll take the long way round," Harrison explained, his finger tracing a route that avoided the main road through town. "It adds an hour, but it's gentler country." He didn't mention that it would also spare Sarah the stares and whispers of Paradise Valley's residents. The morning's events would reach them soon enough, without providing a spectacle. The route wound through golden meadows still touched with morning frost, following the gentle curve of Paradise Creek. Sarah watched the landscape unfold, each turn taking her further from the nightmare of the oak tree. The creek's constant murmur provided a soothing counterpoint to the buggy's steady rhythm. "The ranch has changed some since I left," Harrison said, breaking a comfortable silence. "Added a new wing to the main house, improved the water system." He paused, studying the map's familiar contours. "Mrs. Chen has maintained everything beautifully. She's Chinese, came west with her husband during the gold rush. After he passed, she needed work, and I needed someone who could run a household better than I ever could." The mention of Mrs. Chen sparked Sarah's curiosity. "The council allowed—" She stopped, realizing how deeply she'd internalized their authority. Harrison's smile held a touch of grimness. "The council's reach has always ended at my property line, though they seem to have forgotten that while I was away—" He folded the map with practiced ease. "Mrs. Chen has been with me for 12 years. She's the heart of the Double H, though she'd scoff at hearing me say so." The buggy crested a small rise, and Sarah caught her first glimpse of the ranch house. It stood proud against the backdrop of Thunder Mountain, a 2-story structure of solid timber and native stone. Smoke rose from multiple chimneys, and even at this distance, she could see the signs of careful maintenance in the well-kept grounds and freshly painted trim. "It's beautiful," she breathed, one hand unconsciously moving to protect her belly as the baby shifted. Harrison noticed the gesture. "We have a doctor who visits regularly. Dr. Matthews. No relation, I assume? He's due next week, but I can send for him sooner if needed." The consideration in his voice brought unexpected tears to Sarah's eyes. After months of harsh judgment, simple kindness felt almost foreign. She blinked them away, determined to maintain her composure. "Thank you, but next week will be fine. I'm not due for another month." They passed through an open gate marked with the Double H brand. The road improved immediately, showing the care taken with the ranch's infrastructure. A cluster of outbuildings came into view, stables, workshops, and what appeared to be comfortable housing for the ranch hands. "The ranch employs about 20 people year-round," Harrison explained, "more during busy seasons. Most live on the property with their families." His tone suggested this wasn't just information, it was reassurance. She wouldn't be isolated here. As they approached the house, a small figure appeared on the wide front porch. Mrs. Chen proved to be a tiny woman with iron-grey hair pulled back in a severe bun, her practical dress and apron spotless despite the early hour. Her expression as she watched their approach held more understanding than curiosity. "I sent Tommy ahead while we were getting the buggy," Harrison explained. "Mrs. Chen has prepared a room for you in the east wing. It gets the morning sun, makes it cheerful." He cleared his throat. "It was my wife, Catherine's favorite room." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken history. Sarah found herself wondering about Catherine, about what had happened to make Harrison leave for 15 years, about what had brought him back just when she needed help most. But those were questions for another time. The buggy came to a gentle stop before the front steps. Mrs. Chen descended with surprising agility for her age, her dark eyes taking in Sarah's condition and the marks on her wrists in one comprehensive glance. "Welcome to Double H," she said simply, her accent slight but musical. "Everything is ready." The brass room key felt heavy in Sarah's palm, its surface worn smooth by years of use. Mrs. Chen had presented it with a small bow, as if offering something far more valuable than simple access to a bedroom. "Your space," she had said firmly, emphasizing the word "your" in a way that made Sarah's throat tighten with emotion. The East Wing room exceeded Harrison's modest description. Autumn sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating walls, painted a soft sage green. A four-poster bed, dressed in crisp white linens, dominated one wall, while a cushioned window seat offered views of the distant mountains. A small writing desk stood in one corner, its surface bare, except for a leather-bound journal and a new pen set. "Catherine loved to write," Mrs. Chen explained, following Sarah's gaze to the desk. "Letters, stories, her thoughts about the valley. She believed every woman needs a place to put her truth." The housekeeper moved efficiently around the room, opening windows to let in the fresh mountain air. "The armoire has some things that might fit you. We can alter them if needed." Sarah ran her fingers along the desk's smooth surface, touched by the thoughtfulness of the provision. After months of having her every action scrutinized and judged, the gift of private space and means for self-expression felt like an extraordinary luxury. Mrs. Chen continued her orientation with practical efficiency. "Breakfast is at 7, but I can bring a tray earlier if you prefer. Lunch is informal. The kitchen is always open. Dinner is at 6, though Mr. Harrison often eats in his study when there's business to attend to." She paused, studying Sarah with keen eyes. "Do you have any special needs for the baby?" The question, asked without judgment or curiosity, just practical concern, brought fresh tears to Sarah's eyes. She blinked them away, determined not to spend this first day crying. "No, nothing special, though I admit I haven't been sleeping well lately." Understandable. Mrs. Chen's tone suggested she knew more about the valley's recent events than she let on. "The bed has a new feather mattress, very comfortable, and—" She hesitated, then continued, "If you need company in the night, my room is just down the hall. I'm a light sleeper." Sarah nodded, touched by the offer. "Thank you, Mrs. Chen, for everything." "May," the older woman said suddenly. "My given name is May. The ranch hands call me Mrs. Chen because it's easier for them, but you—" She smiled, transforming her serious face. "You can call me May." After Mrs. Chen, May, left, Sarah explored her new sanctuary more thoroughly. The armoire yielded dresses that, while a few years out of fashion, were of fine quality and could indeed be altered to accommodate her condition. The adjoining washroom featured modern plumbing, a luxury she hadn't expected to find so far from town. She was examining the journal, its pages blank and promising, when a soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Harrison stood in the doorway, keeping a respectful distance. "I hope everything meets your needs," he said, his deep voice careful and kind. "May has strong opinions about comfort." "It's perfect," Sarah assured him, "more than I could have imagined." She turned to face him fully. "Mr. Harrison, I don't know how to thank you." He held up a hand, gently interrupting. "James," he said, "please call me James. And no thanks are necessary. This house—" He glanced around the room, his eyes holding memories. "It was meant for family. It's been too empty for too long." The words hung between them, heavy with unspoken history. Sarah found herself wanting to ask about Catherine, about the years of absence, but something in his expression suggested those stories would come in their own time. "I'll leave you to settle in," Harrison said after a moment, "but please know that while you're here, you're under my protection. The council's influence ends at my property line." His jaw tightened slightly. "And I intend to remind them of that, backed very clearly in the coming days." After he left, Sarah sat at the writing desk, running her fingers over the smooth leather of the journal. For the first time in months, she felt truly safe. The key lay beside the journal, catching the afternoon light, no longer just a means of securing a door, but a symbol of independence, of privacy, of the right to exist without constant judgment. She opened the journal to its first blank page and picked up the pen. "Dear child," she wrote, "today marks a new beginning for us both." The threatening note arrived with the morning supply wagon, its message written in Elder Montgomery's precise hand on council letterhead. Mrs. Chen discovered it tucked between sacks of flour and coffee, bringing it directly to Harrison's study. He read it twice, his expression hardening with each line. "Mr. Harrison, your interference in council matters cannot go unchallenged. Your lengthy absence has perhaps clouded your understanding of local governance. The moral authority of this council extends throughout Paradise Valley. We strongly advise you to release Miss Matthews to our custody immediately. Failure to comply will result in certain economic consequences. Consider carefully the contracts that supply your ranch and the markets that purchase your cattle." Harrison placed the note on his desk, alongside reports of suddenly cancelled supply agreements and mysterious complications with the ranch's usual business partners. The council's influence, it seemed, reached further than he'd anticipated. "They're scared," Mrs. Chen observed, setting down Harrison's morning coffee. "Scared men often mistake cruelty for strength." "Scared men are dangerous men," Harrison replied, but his tone held more determination than concern. He pulled out a ledger of his own, this one documenting the Double H Ranch's business connections well beyond Paradise Valley. Time to remind them that their little kingdom has bigger neighbors. Sarah found him there an hour later, writing letters at his desk. She'd taken to wearing one of Catherine's modified dresses, the soft blue fabric making her look both more vulnerable and more dignified. "I heard about the note," she said quietly. "Perhaps I should—" "If you're about to suggest leaving," Harrison interrupted, looking up from his correspondence, "please don't. The council's tactics only confirm that you need protection." His voice softened. "Unless you want to leave? You're not a prisoner here, Sarah?" She shook her head quickly. "No, I feel safe here, but I don't want to cause trouble for you or the ranch." Harrison's laugh held no humor. "The trouble isn't you, Sarah. It's men who've grown too comfortable with power they were never meant to have." He gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Sit, please. You should know what we're facing." As Sarah settled carefully into the leather chair, Harrison outlined the council's initial retaliatory moves. The general store had cancelled its regular supply orders. The grain mill suddenly couldn't accommodate the ranch's wheat. 3 families had withdrawn their children from the ranch school where Mrs. Chen taught basic lessons. "They're trying to isolate us," Sarah observed, her teacher's mind analyzing the pattern. "Cut off supplies, education, social connections." "Yes, but they've overplayed their hand." Harrison smiled, and for the first time, Sarah saw a glimpse of the strategic mind behind his gentle manner. "The Double H isn't just a ranch, it's the largest private employer in 3 counties. Our contracts extend to Helena, even to Chicago. Montgomery's about to learn that his reach isn't nearly as long as he thinks." A knock at the study door interrupted them. Tommy Webber entered, his young face worried. "Mr. Harrison? Riders coming up the main road. Looks like the council members, and they've got the sheriff with them." Harrison stood, his movement unhurried. "As expected. Sarah, you don't have to face them if you don't want to." But Sarah was already rising, one hand protectively over her belly. "No, I think I do. I'm tired of hiding from their judgment." They walked together to the front porch, where Mrs. Chen had already positioned herself like a tiny sentinel. The approaching riders made an impressive sight, all 5 council members, plus Sheriff Taylor, their horses kicking up dust in the morning light. Harrison's ranch hands appeared casually but strategically around the yard, going about their business, while keeping the approaching group in sight. The message was clear. The council might have brought the sheriff, but they were outnumbered on Double H land. "Remember," Harrison said quietly as the riders approached, "you have nothing to be ashamed of. They're the ones who chained a pregnant woman to a tree. Every action they take now only shows their true character to more people." Sarah straightened her spine, feeling stronger than she had in months. The threatening note might have been meant to intimidate, but it had only revealed the council's desperation. Here, surrounded by people who valued justice over judgment, she found herself ready to face whatever came next. The riders pulled up in a cloud of dust, Montgomery's face already flushed with righteous indignation. But before he could speak, Harrison's calm voice carried across the yard. "Sheriff Taylor, welcome to the Double H. I trust you're here to investigate the council's recent assault on Miss Matthews?" The garden tools stood in a neat row against the greenhouse wall, their wooden handles worn smooth by years of use. Sarah had discovered them during her third week at the Double H, when restlessness had driven her to explore beyond the main house. The small greenhouse, tucked behind the kitchen garden, became her sanctuary in the cool autumn mornings. "Catherine started this," Mrs. Chen explained one morning, finding Sarah gently turning soil around young herb plants. She said every proper ranch needed fresh herbs year-round. The housekeeper's eyes softened at the memory. These tools were her pride. "She taught me how to grow Chinese medicinal herbs here too." Sarah wiped her brow, enjoying the honest tiredness that came from physical work. "I never thought I'd find peace in gardening. In town, everything was about appearances. Here," she gestured to her dirt-stained apron and smiled, "here it's about what actually grows." The greenhouse had become more than just a garden. Ranch hands' wives would stop by with questions about herbs or to share cuttings, their initial awkwardness around Sarah gradually melting into genuine warmth. Even some of the townswomen who had previously shunned her had begun to find excuses to visit, drawn by Mrs. Chen's famous medicinal teas and the greenhouse's reputation for rare plants. Harrison would sometimes pause by the greenhouse door in the evenings, watching Sarah work with quiet appreciation. "You've brought it back to life," he said one evening, noting the newly organized beds and flourishing plants. "It's been too long since anyone took a real interest in it. It gives me a purpose," Sarah replied, carefully transplanting a young rosemary bush. "After losing my teaching position, I feared I'd never find that again." She didn't mention how the gentle work seemed to ease her pregnancy discomfort, or how the greenhouse's warm air and earthy scents helped chase away memories of that cold. Night chained to the oak tree, the ranch's rhythm had become her rhythm. She rose early with Mrs. Chen, helping with breakfast for the ranch hands before spending her mornings in the greenhouse. Afternoons were often spent in the ranch's small schoolroom, where she'd gradually taken over teaching duties from Mrs. Chen, who claimed her English wasn't good enough for the older children. The children, unlike their town counterparts, showed no judgment of her condition. Little Amy Weber, Tommy's sister, had simply asked, "Will your baby come to school with us?" The question, asked with such innocent hope, had brought unexpected tears to Sarah's eyes. Harrison had expanded the schoolroom, adding new books and supplies without fanfare. "Education shouldn't stop at property lines," he'd said when Sarah thanked him. His support was always like that, quiet, practical, offered without expectation of gratitude. The ranch hands' families had accepted her presence with surprising ease, following Harrison's lead without question. "The boss has his reasons," she'd overheard old Pete telling a new hand who'd asked about her situation, "and his reasons tend to be right." Even the baby seemed to approve of ranch life, becoming more active during her greenhouse sessions, as if dancing to the rhythm of her gardening. Sarah had begun talking to it while she worked, sharing stories of the plants, the ranch, and increasingly, of Harrison. "He's not what I expected," she confided to Mrs. Chen one afternoon as they harvested mint for tea. "When people spoke of him in town, they described someone remote, almost harsh." Mrs. Chen's knowing smile held years of observation. "Grief changes how people see you," she said simply, "and how you let yourself be seen." She paused in her work, fixing Sarah with a direct look. "He's different since you came, more like before." "Catherine died." The statement hung in the greenhouse's warm air, heavy with implication. Sarah focused on her mint cutting, trying to ignore the flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with the baby's movement. As if summoned by their conversation, Harrison appeared in the doorway, his tall frame blocking the setting sun. "Ladies," he said, the corner of his mouth lifting in a half-smile, "I believe you're needed in the kitchen. The hands are threatening rebellion over Mrs. Chen's dumplings." "They always threaten," Mrs. Chen sniffed, but her eyes twinkled. "Come, Sarah, time you learned the recipe. A woman should know how to quiet rebellious men with food." Sarah gathered her tools, placing them carefully in their row against the wall. Each one had its place, just as she was finding hers. The greenhouse, door closed behind them, locking in warmth and possibility, while ahead the ranch house windows glowed with welcome in the gathering dusk. The old photograph slipped from between the pages of Catherine's journal as Sarah was returning it to the study shelf. Sepia-toned and slightly faded, it captured a moment frozen in time. A younger Harrison, standing proud beside a beautiful woman with kind eyes and an elegant bearing. Catherine, but it was the subtle curve of her belly, barely visible in the formal pose, that caught Sarah's attention. "That was taken 3 months before we lost her." Harrison's voice came quietly from the doorway. Sarah startled, almost dropping the photograph, but he waved away her apology. "No need. It's time someone knew the whole truth." He crossed to the leather armchair by the fireplace, gesturing for Sarah to take its mate. The evening light was fading, and the study's oak-paneled walls seemed to draw closer, creating an intimate space for secrets long held silent. "Catherine was 7 months along when she fell ill," Harrison began, his eyes on the photograph Sarah still held. "The local doctor was away, and the council—" His jaw tightened at the memory. "Montgomery's predecessor decided that seeking help from the Indian medicine woman who lived beyond the valley would be morally questionable. They delayed us 3 crucial days with their deliberations." Sarah's hand instinctively moved to her, own belly understanding dawning. They let her die. They didn't see it that way, of course. They called it preserving the moral fabric of the community. By the time I got her to Helena, it was too late. We lost both her and the baby. Harrison's voice held old pain, but also something else, a slow, burning anger that had never quite undied. I couldn't stay after that. Couldn't bear to watch them continue passing judgment on others' lives while wearing their pious masks. The photograph trembled slightly in Sarah's hands as the parallels became clear. "That's why you came back. When you did, you heard about what they were doing to me. Old Pete's letters mentioned a pregnant teacher being harassed by the council. I tried to tell myself it wasn't my concern, that the valley had to solve its own problems." He met her eyes directly. Then his last letter described their plans for that night, and I knew I couldn't let history repeat itself. Sarah carefully placed the photograph on the small table between them. "But you didn't just save me from them. You've given me a home, purpose, protection. Perhaps I'm trying to make up for not fighting harder 15 years ago." Harrison's smile held a touch of self-deprecation. "Or perhaps seeing you in that clearing, refusing to be broken by their judgment. It reminded me of Catherine. She had that same strength." The comparison should have made Sarah uncomfortable, but instead it felt right. A connection across time, a shared understanding of what it meant to stand against cruel authority. "What was she like?" she asked softly. Harrison's expression softened. "With memories. Brilliant, passionate about education like you. She started the ranch school, you know. Taught the Hands children herself." He gestured to the greenhouse visible through the study window. "Created beauty wherever she went. But most of all, she believed in justice. Real justice. Not the kind Montgomery and his ilk deal in." A log shifted in the fireplace, sending sparks, dancing. Sarah watched them fade, thinking of the woman in the photograph, of chances lost and found again. "The council's power is weakening," she observed. "More families are sending their children to the ranch school. Women come to the greenhouse daily now. Even Peterson's wife visited yesterday." Yes, Harrison agreed. Though they won't go quietly, Montgomery's too invested in his own authority. He studied Sarah thoughtfully. Are you afraid? She considered the question carefully. Not of them, not anymore. But sometimes, she hesitated, then continued honestly. Sometimes I'm afraid of disappointing you. Of not being worthy of all you've done? Sarah. Her name on his lips held warmth she'd grown to treasure. You've brought life back to this ranch in ways I never expected. The greenhouse thrives, the school grows, the Hands families are happier than I've seen in years. He leaned forward, his voice gentle but firm. You've nothing to prove to me or anyone else. The photograph caught the last light of day, Catherine's face seeming to smile at them both. In that moment, Sarah felt a profound sense of rightness, as if the past and present had aligned, offering healing not just to her, but to Harrison as well. They sat in comfortable silence as darkness gathered, each lost in thoughts of endings and beginnings, of justice delayed but not denied. The petition arrived on a Tuesday morning, carried by Peterson's wife Clara, of all people. Its pages bore the signatures of over 30 Paradise Valley families, their neat lines of handwriting representing a quiet rebellion against the council's authority. The document's formal heading read, "In support of the Double H Ranch School and Miss Matthews' return to teaching." Clara Peterson's hands shook slightly as she presented it to Harrison in his study, her usual timid demeanor strengthened by determination. It started with the mothers, she explained, while Sarah sat quietly nearby, her hands folded over her growing belly. After seeing how the children flourish here at the ranch school, then others began to question. About Catherine, about the council's other judgments over the years. Harrison studied the petition carefully, recognition flickering in his eyes at certain names. The Millers have signed, he noted, and the Warners, families the council has wronged before. People remember, Clara said softly. They just needed permission to speak about it. She turned to Sarah, her face flushed with emotion. What they did to you, it opened old wounds for many of us, made us remember other times. We stayed silent when we should have spoken. Sarah reached for the petition, her finger tracing the familiar names. Parents of children she had taught in town, neighbors who had turned away from her in the streets just months ago. What does your husband think of this? She asked gently. Clara straightened her spine. George has lived too long in Montgomery's shadow. We all have. But he's a good man. And when I showed him Catherine's medical records from that time, she paused, glancing apologetically at Harrison. The ones that proved the Indian medicine woman might have saved her. You found those records, Harrison's. Her voice was carefully controlled. They were in the council archive. George had access. I may have borrowed his keys one night. A hint of defiance colored Clara's voice. Montgomery kept them to justify their decision, but they prove exactly the opposite. Harrison stood and walked to the window, his posture rigid with suppressed emotion. And now people are talking. About Catherine, about Sarah, about all the council's moral judgments over the years. Clara's quiet voice carried the weight of long-held secrets finally spoken. The widow Thompson is telling anyone who'll listen about how they forced her to sell her land. The Warner boy has written from Denver, offering to testify about his father's treatment. Sarah watched Harrison's back, seeing the tension in his shoulders. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about 15 years of accumulated injustice, about a community finally finding its voice. What do you want from me? Harrison asked, turning back to face them. Leadership, Clara replied simply. The Valley trusts you, even after all these years. With the Double H's support, we can make real changes. Start with the school. Make it official, open to all children. Show that there's a different way than the council's judgment. Sarah found herself speaking up. The greenhouse, too. It's already becoming a gathering place. Women come for herbs, but stay to talk, to share stories. She smiled at Clara. To plan petitions, apparently. Harrison picked up the petition again, his expression thoughtful. Montgomery won't accept this quietly. He'll see it as a direct challenge to his authority. It is, Clara said firmly, and it's long overdue. She stood, smoothing her skirts with trembling hands that belied her calm voice. We've lived under their shadow too long, letting them twist God's love into something harsh and controlling. Catherine understood that. Now Sarah's helping us remember. The mention of Catherine's name no longer brought pain to Harrison's face, Sarah noticed. Instead, there was a quiet pride, as if his late wife's vision for the valley was finally taking root. Tell your group to be patient, Harrison said finally. Change has to be handled carefully, or Montgomery will find a way to twist it against us. But, he smiled slightly, the Double H's doors remain open to all who seek something better than judgment. After Clara left, Sarah and Harrison sat in companionable silence, the petition lying between them like a bridge between past and future. Through the window, they could see women gathering near the greenhouse, their voices carrying faintly on the autumn air. The council's hold on Paradise Valley had begun to crack, not through confrontation or force, but through the quiet strength of people choosing a different way. Catherine would be proud, Sarah said softly, watching the gathering below, of all of this. Harrison's hand found hers, warm and steady. Yes, he replied simply. She would. The doctor's bag sat unused on the entrance hall table, its worn leather surface reflecting the frantic movements of lanterns as people hurried through the house. Dr. Matthews had been detained in town, deliberately, Harrison suspected, by council members claiming urgent needs for his services. Now Sarah's labor had begun 3 weeks early, and the nearest medical help was hours away. The baby's coming too fast, Mrs. Chen announced, emerging briefly from Sarah's room. Her usual calm demeanor showed cracks of worry, and she's burning with fever. The words hung in the air like smoke, carrying echoes of another night, another fever, another woman Harrison couldn't bear to lose. Send riders in all directions, Harrison ordered Tommy Webber, who stood ready by the door. Find Dr. Matthews. And if you can't, bring anyone with medical knowledge, midwives, healers, anyone. He paused, then added quietly, including Walking Dove from the Indian settlement. Tommy's eyes widened at the mention of the medicine woman who might have saved Catherine, but he nodded and disappeared into the night. Through the open door came the sound of multiple horses galloping out, their hoofbeats carrying hope in different directions. Harrison paced the hallway, every cry from Sarah's room piercing him like a physical blow. Mrs. Chen had banned him from entering. Men only make birthing harder, she'd declared, but staying away proved near impossible, especially when each sound carried memories of another night, another loss. Clara Peterson arrived an hour later, breathless and determined. I've helped with births before, she announced, already rolling up her sleeves, and I brought my grandmother's remedies. She hurried into the room without waiting for permission, her practical energy providing a momentary comfort. But as the night wore on, the situation grew more desperate. Sarah's fever rose, and her strength began to fade. Mrs. Chen's face grew, graver with each emergence from the room. The ranch hands' wives gathered in the kitchen, brewing teas and saying prayers, their whispered conversations carrying up the stairs. Harrison! Clara's voice from the doorway startled him. She looked exhausted, her apron stained. She's asking for you. He found Sarah pale against the pillows, her hair dark with sweat, but her eyes clear and focused when they found his. I'm sorry, she whispered as he knelt beside the bed. Don't, he said firmly, taking her hand. You have nothing to be sorry for. If anything happens, she began, but he cut her off. Nothing will happen. I won't lose you too. The words came out fiercer than he intended, raw with old pain and new fear. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. Catherine would be proud of you, you know, standing against them, protecting others. Another contraction took her words, her hand tightening on his. Through the window came the sudden sound of horses approaching at speed. Harrison reluctantly released Sarah's hand and moved to look out. In the moonlight, he could make out several riders, and among them, his heart leaped, the distinctive figure of Walking Dove on her pinto pony. The medicine woman didn't wait for an invitation. She swept into the house carrying a bundle of herbs and supplies, her silver hair gleaming in the lamplight. Behind her came Dr. Matthews, looking shamefaced. "The council kept manufacturing emergencies," he explained to Harrison, "until Walking Dove arrived in town and told everyone what they were doing. People weren't happy. Walking Dove was already in Sarah's room, her presence bringing a calm authority that affected everyone. Her voice, when it emerged, carried the wisdom of generations. 'The fever first,' she declared, 'then the baby will come as it should.'" The next hours passed in a blur of activity. Walking Dove and Mrs. Chen worked in seamless cooperation, their different healing traditions blending in service of a single purpose. Dr. Matthews provided what help they allowed, while Clara Peterson kept up a steady stream of cool cloths and heated water. Harrison found himself relegated to the hallway again, where he could only listen and pray. The doctor's bag still sat on the entrance table, untouched, a symbol of how official authority had failed them, while healing came from unexpected sources. Dawn was breaking when a new sound cut through the tension, the lusty cry of a healthy baby. Harrison's heart stopped, waiting for what would follow. Then Mrs. Chen appeared, her face wreathed in smiles. "A girl," she announced, "strong and perfect. And Sarah," she gripped Harrison's arm, understanding his unspoken fear, "Sarah will be fine. The fever's breaking." The doctor's bag witnessed the exodus of relieved helpers, the quiet celebrations, the first morning of a new family. Walking Dove was the last to leave, pausing by Harrison. "Some things," she said softly, "happen as they must, not to replace what was lost, but to heal what remains." The pressed flower, a delicate spring violet, lay between the pages of Sarah's journal, its purple hue still vibrant against the cream paper. She'd found it that morning, carefully placed between her daily entries, and recognized it from the greenhouse's first blooms. Only Harrison had been in there with her when she discovered the early violet pushing through the winter soil. 2 weeks had passed since little Catherine's birth. The name chosen with quiet tears and Harrison's grateful smile. Sarah sat in her favorite window seat, the baby sleeping peacefully in a cradle nearby, and touched the pressed flower with gentle fingers. The gesture behind it spoke volumes about the man who'd placed it there, about changes as subtle and persistent as flowers growing through snow. Mrs. Chen had taken to watching them with knowing eyes, especially when Harrison would spend evenings in Sarah's sitting room, holding the baby while Sarah rested. "Some hearts," she'd remarked cryptically, "need winter's quiet to prepare for spring's blooming." The household had settled into new rhythms around the baby. Harrison had moved his paperwork to the sitting room, adjoining Sarah's quarters, claiming the light was better there. If this arrangement also allowed him to spend hours in their company, no one mentioned it directly. "She has your eyes," he said now, entering with his usual quiet courtesy. He carried 2 cups of Mrs. Chen's special tea, a blend she claimed was perfect for new mothers. "But her determination, that's all you." Sarah accepted the tea with a smile, noting how naturally he moved to check on the sleeping infant. The determination might be from both sides. Mrs. Chen tells stories about a certain rancher who wouldn't take no for an answer when she first arrived here. "Ah, well." Harrison settled into the chair nearest her window seat, his presence both comfortable and thrilling. "Sometimes stubbornness serves a purpose." They sat in companionable silence, watching the late winter sun paint the mountains gold. Sarah found herself studying his profile, the strong lines softened by the evening light. He'd taken to wearing his reading glasses more often, no longer hiding the silver at his temples, small signs of trust that touched her deeply. "The greenhouse violets are blooming again," he said finally, a hint of color touching his cheeks. "I thought you might like to see them when you're feeling stronger." Sarah fingered the pressed flower in her journal. "Someone brought one to me already," she said softly. Though they seemed shy about admitting it, Harrison's smile was almost boyish. Perhaps they weren't sure of their welcome. Some gifts can carry weight beyond their size, and some weights are worth carrying. Sarah surprised herself with her boldness, but these weeks of shared parenthood, for that was what it had become, had built a bridge between them that felt increasingly sturdy. He met her eyes then, his own full of carefully contained emotion. "Sarah, I would never presume. Your circumstances when you came here were desperate," she finished for him. "But that's not why I stayed." She glanced at the sleeping baby, then back to him. "Not why I want to stay." Harrison set his tea aside and leaned forward, his voice gentle but serious. "I'm too old, too set in my ways. I deserve to choose," Sarah interrupted, her tone firm. "Just as you chose to help me, to give me a home, to love Catherine as your own." She drew the pressed flower from her journal. "To court me with greenhouse violets and evening talks and 1,000 small kindnesses." He reached out slowly and took the flower from her fingers, his touch sending warmth through her entire body. "I've loved you," he admitted quietly, "since I saw you standing proud despite their chains. But I feared offering more would seem like obligation, that you might feel pressed to accept out of gratitude." James, his given name, still felt new on her tongue. Precious. "Look at me. Really look." He did, and whatever he saw in her face made him catch his breath. Sarah felt the last walls between them crumbling like winter ice in spring floods. "I choose you," she said simply. "Not from gratitude, though I'll always be grateful. Not from obligation, though I feel blessed by every duty we share. I choose you because my heart recognized its home that first morning, even in the midst of fear and pain." Harrison stood and moved to the window seat, taking her hands in his. The pressed violet fell forgotten between them as he drew her gently to her feet. "Then I choose you too," he whispered, "for all the seasons to come." Their first kiss was soft as flower petals, witnessed only by the sleeping baby and the last rays of sunset painting the mountains rose and gold. In her cradle, little Catherine sighed contentedly, as if approving this new bloom of love in the heart of Paradise Valley. The travel trunk stood in Peterson's store like an unwelcome guest, its brass fittings gleaming with the polish of regular use. Thomas Edwards had arrived with the spring traders, his merchant's wagon now expanded to a small caravan. He cut a prosperous figure in his Eastern suit, but his confident smile faltered when Clara Peterson coldly informed him of recent events in Paradise Valley. Word of his return reached the Double H by mid-morning. Harrison received the news in his study, where he and Sarah had been reviewing plans to expand the ranch school. Little Catherine slept in her basket nearby, peaceful and unaware that her world had suddenly grown more complicated. "He's asking about Sarah," Tommy Webber reported, twisting his hat in his hands. "Says he has a right to see his child." Harrison's hand tightened on his pen, but his voice remained steady. "Sarah will decide if he has any rights here." He looked at her with concern. "What do you want to do?" Sarah lifted Catherine from her basket, holding her close. The baby's weight, solid and warm, helped steady her racing heart. "I need to face him," she said quietly. "To end this properly." She met Harrison's eyes, but not alone. "Never alone again," he promised, rising to stand beside them both. They arranged the meeting for that afternoon. Thomas arrived in a rented buggy, his travel trunk loaded conspicuously behind the seat, a clear statement of his intentions to stay. He'd clearly expected to meet Sarah in the ranch house parlor, but Harrison had set up chairs in the garden near the greenhouse, where ranch hands worked within easy calling distance. Sarah sat waiting, Catherine in her arms, Harrison a solid presence beside her. She'd chosen to wear one of her own dresses rather than Catherine's altered ones, a small detail, but one that helped her remember her strength. Thomas's practiced charm evaporated when he saw them together, saw the protective way Harrison's hand rested on the back of Sarah's chair. "I came as soon as I could," he began, remaining standing despite the offered seat. "My business in the East took precedence over everything else," Sarah finished for him, her voice calm. As it always did, as it always would. I have a right to know my child, Thomas insisted, his handsome face flushing. I can provide for you both now. My business has expanded. Her name is Catherine, Sarah interrupted, and she's already provided for in all the ways that matter. Thomas's eyes narrowed as he looked between them, taking in their closeness, the matching bands of gold on their fingers that caught the spring sunlight. I see, he said coldly. You've certainly landed. On your feet. Tell me, Harrison, do you make a habit of collecting strays? Harrison's movement was so smooth that Sarah barely registered it until he was standing, his height allowing him to look down at Thomas with quiet contempt. Choose your next words very carefully, Mr. Edwards. They may be the last you speak in. Paradise Valley. Something in Harrison's tone, not threat but absolute certainty, made Thomas step back. I have rights, he blustered, but with less conviction. You had responsibilities, Sarah corrected him, rising to stand beside her husband. You abandoned them, just as you abandoned the other women in other towns. Oh yes, we've heard the stories from the traders. How many children have you left behind, Thomas? How many lives have you disrupted with your promises? Thomas flinched, his confident facade cracking. I never meant. Intent means nothing without action, Harrison said quietly. Sarah faced the council's cruelty alone. She rebuilt her life alone. The only right you have here is the right to leave, knowing your daughter is loved and protected by people who understand what those words mean. Catherine chose that moment to wake, her blue eyes, so like Sarah's, blinking in the sunlight. She turned her face into Sarah's shoulder, one tiny hand reaching out to grasp Harrison's finger when he moved closer. Thomas watched this small family moment with an expression Sarah had never seen on his face before. Regret, perhaps, or recognition of what he'd thrown away. His shoulders slumped slightly. I could provide money, at least, for her future. Catherine's future is secure, Harrison replied. But if you wish to salve your conscience, the ranch school building fund accepts donations for all the valley's children. They watched Thomas drive away, his travel trunk bouncing slightly on its straps. Sarah felt no triumph, no anger, only a deep gratitude for the family she'd found, the love she'd chosen and been chosen by in return. Well, Harrison said softly, drawing her close. That's done. Yes, Sarah agreed, leaning into his strength while Catherine dozed between them. Now we can begin. The legal document lay unfolded on the town hall table, its official seals and signatures spelling the end of an era in Paradise Valley. Harrison had obtained it from the territorial governor himself, a formal charter establishing a proper town. Council with elected officials, effectively dissolving the old council's self-appointed authority. Montgomery stood at the head of the crowded hall, his face mottled with rage as he read the document for the third time. The other council members shifted uneasily in their seats, reading the mood of the gathered townspeople. The room hummed with tension and expectation. This is outrageous, Montgomery finally sputtered. You cannot simply sweep aside generations of moral authority with a piece of paper. Moral authority? Clara Peterson's voice rang out clear and strong. She stood near the front holding a leather-bound book, like the moral authority that let Catherine Harrison die or that chained Sarah Matthews to a tree. She opened the book, the council's own ledger, and began to read dates and names, each one a story of cruelty dealt in righteousness's name. The crowd murmured as Clara read, many nodding in recognition of their own experiences or those of their neighbors. Sarah, sitting beside Harrison with Catherine sleeping peacefully in her arms, watched faces shift from uncertainty to resolution. We were protecting the valley's values, Montgomery insisted, but his voice had lost its usual commanding tone. By whose measure, Harrison asked quietly, standing, by driving out good people, by forcing widows to sell their land, by denying medical care to those who didn't meet your standards. He moved to the front of the hall, every inch the leader Paradise Valley had been missing. I've watched good people leave this valley, watched families broken, watched justice twisted into persecution. No more. Sarah noticed Peterson and the Clark brothers exchanging glances, seeing the writing on the wall. Only Montgomery seemed unable to read the room's mood, clinging to his threatened power like a drowning man to driftwood. "The council has maintained order," Montgomery began, but was cut off by an unexpected voice. "The council has maintained fear." Dr. Matthews stood, his dignity restored now that he'd found his courage. "I've watched people suffer and die because I was too afraid to defy you. That ends today." He moved to stand beside Harrison. "I support the new charter." One by one, people rose to voice their support. Clara Peterson's careful documentation of the council's abuses had circulated through the valley over the past months, opening old wounds, but also allowing them to finally heal properly. "This is illegal," Montgomery tried one last time. "You have no right." "Actually," Harrison interrupted, tapping the charter, "this makes it perfectly legal, signed by the territorial governor himself. You see, while you were busy maintaining your moral authority, I was building something more substantial, legal authority backed by territory law." Sarah watched Montgomery deflate as he realized how thoroughly he'd been outmaneuvered. Harrison had spent months preparing this moment, gathering support not just in the valley, but beyond it. The charter was just the final piece. "There will be proper elections in 1 month, Harrison continued, addressing the crowd now. "Every adult resident eligible to vote. No more self-appointed moral guardians, just neighbors working together to build a better valley." "And what of our traditional values?" Montgomery demanded, making a last stand. "True values don't need chains and threats to enforce them." Sarah found herself speaking, her voice carrying in the hushed room. "They need compassion, understanding, and the wisdom to know that none of us has the right to judge another's worth." Catherine stirred in her arms, blinking at the crowd. Someone in the back called out, "Let Harrison run for council head." Others took up the cry, but Harrison raised his hand for quiet. "No," he said firmly, "I'll help where I can, but it's time for new voices, younger voices, people who felt the weight of judgment and learned from it." His eyes met Sarah's with quiet pride, people who understand that true authority comes from service, not power. The legal document made its way around the hall, each person reading it for themselves. Montgomery finally slumped in his chair, decades of absolute authority draining away. The other council members had already moved to distance themselves, William Clark being the first to publicly support the new charter. Sarah watched it all with a deep sense of completion. The valley wouldn't change overnight. Change never did. But the foundations of fear had been broken. In their place, something new could grow, just as love had grown from the ashes of her own trials. Harrison returned to her side, dropping a gentle kiss on Catherine's head before taking Sarah's hand. Together, they watched Paradise Valley take its first steps toward a future built on justice rather than judgment, on love rather than fear. The baby blanket spread across Sarah's lap, its intricate pattern telling a story of love and acceptance. Mrs. Chen had worked on it secretly during those early days, incorporating both Western quilting techniques and traditional Chinese symbols for luck and protection. Now, as Sarah traced the delicate stitching, she marveled at how it represented the blending of their unlikely family. "It's a marriage blanket too," Mrs. Chen explained, sitting beside Sarah on the porch swing while Harrison played with Catherine. "On the lawn. See these patterns? In my village, they mean two streams joining to form a stronger river." Her weathered fingers pointed out the flowing lines, "Like you and Mr. Harrison, becoming something new together." The spring afternoon wrapped around them warm and golden. Catherine's delighted squeals carried across the yard as Harrison lifted, her dark curls catching the sunlight. At 8 months old, she had her mother's eyes and what Mrs. Chen called her father's heart, meaning Harrison's, not Thomas's, for biology had long since ceased to matter in defining their family. "The valley's changing," Sarah observed, watching several ranch hands' children playing nearby, their games now including the children from town who attended the expanded ranch school. Sometimes I can hardly believe how much. Change comes from love, Mrs. Chen said wisely, like water wearing away stone, slow but unstoppable. She smiled as Harrison approached, Catherine reaching for Sarah with familiar trust. Some stones are ready to be shaped. Harrison settled beside them, his arm naturally finding its place around Sarah's shoulders. Catherine snuggled into the blanket's soft folds, her eyes heavy with approaching nap time. Pete says more families are asking about settling near the ranch, he reported. The valley's growing faster than anyone expected. They come for the school, Mrs. Chen said with quiet pride. The ranch school had flourished under Sarah's guidance, its reputation spreading beyond Paradise Valley. They stay for the community. Sarah felt Harrison's arm tighten slightly around her. Speaking of community, he said, Walking Dove asked about Catherine today. She'd like to perform a blessing ceremony if we're willing. Says every child should know they belong to more than one. Tradition of love. Tears pricked Sarah's eyes as she remembered the medicine woman's role in Catherine's birth, how she had brought healing not just to their family, but to the valley's old wounds. I'd like that, she said softly. Very much. Mrs. Chen nodded approvingly. I'll make special dumplings. Blessings need proper celebration. She rose with her characteristic efficiency. And Mr. Montgomery's wife asked if she could come to tomorrow's garden club meeting. Says she's finally ready to learn about herbs. The mention of Montgomery brought no tension now. The former council head had gradually withdrawn from public life, his power fading not through confrontation, but through the simple fact that people had found better ways to live. His wife's tentative steps toward the community were welcomed with gentle understanding. Catherine stirred in Sarah's arms, her small hand clutching the blanket. Mama, she murmured sleepily, the word still new enough to bring joy each time. Then reaching for Harrison, Papa. Harrison's face softened, as it always did at the title. He gathered them both closer, the blanket wrapping around them like a cocoon of belonging. I never thought I'd hear those words again, he admitted quietly. After Catherine, my first Catherine, I thought that part of life was over. Life has its own wisdom, Mrs. Chen said, pausing at the porch door. Knows what hearts need, even when minds are too hurt to listen. She gave them one of her rare, full smiles. I'll bring tea after the little one's nap. They sat in comfortable silence as Catherine drifted to sleep, the blanket rising and falling with her peaceful breaths. From the greenhouse came the sound of women's voices, the afternoon garden club gathering to share knowledge and friendship. The school bell rang in the distance, marking the end of lessons. Horses nickered in the stable yard. All the ordinary sounds of family life, once lost, now found again. Do you ever regret it? Sarah asked softly, taking in a desperate woman and her unborn child, challenging the council, changing everything. Harrison's kiss was gentle against her temple. Only regret would have been not doing it. His hand joined hers on the blanket, their fingers intertwining over the pattern of joining streams. Some changes looked like endings when they're really beginnings in disguise. Catherine sighed in her sleep, the blanket symbols of luck and protection, wrapping her in generations of love, not just from her parents, but from every person who had helped weave their family's unlikely story into something beautiful and strong. The diamond ring caught the last light of sunset, its antique setting telling a story of love that spanned generations. Harrison held it carefully as he stood in Catherine's old room, his first Catherine's, where a cedar chest had preserved her most precious possessions. The ring had been her grandmother's, then hers, and she had once told him it should belong to someone who understood that love was both a gift and a choice. She would want you to have it, Mrs. Chen said softly from the doorway. For Sarah. She moved into the room with quiet reverence, touching the cedar chest gently. Catherine always said true love knows no jealousy, even from beyond. Harrison. closed the ring box, its soft click echoing with decision. I've been carrying it with me for weeks, waiting for the right moment, but every moment seems either too public or too ordinary for what I want to say. Mrs. Chen's wise eyes crinkled with amusement. Love makes wise men foolish. The moment is right when hearts are ready. She gestured to the window where they could see Sarah in the garden, teaching little Catherine the names of flowers. And those hearts have been ready for some time. The garden had bloomed extraordinarily this spring, as if nature itself celebrated the valley's renewal. Sarah had expanded it beyond the greenhouse, creating spaces where medicinal herbs grew alongside. Flowers, where town children learned about growing things alongside ranch children. Like everything she touched, it had become a place of healing and growth. Harrison watched her show Catherine a butterfly landing on a flower, their shared delight visible even from a distance. His heart felt too full for his chest. Love for them, both tangled up with gratitude for this second chance at happiness. "Go," Mrs. Chen commanded gently, "before you think yourself out of the courage you've been gathering." She shooed him toward the door with the authority of long service and deep affection. "I'll keep little Catherine occupied when the time comes." The evening air carried the scent of roses as Harrison crossed to the garden. Sarah looked up at his approach, her smile warming him more than the setting sun. But before he could speak, she said, "I've been thinking about Catherine." His heart stuttered for a moment before she continued, "Your first Catherine, about how love doesn't diminish when it's shared, only grows stronger." She reached for his hand, twining their fingers together. "Mrs. Chen showed me her journal today, the one where she wrote about this garden, about her hopes for the valley's future." Harrison squeezed her hand gently. "She would have loved seeing what you've done with it. What you've done for all of us." "That's just it," Sarah said softly. Reading her words, I felt like I knew her. Her dreams for this place, for you, for the kind of love that builds rather than binds. They're the same dreams I have now. She turned to face him fully. "I've been carrying something too." From her apron pocket, she drew out a small, wrapped package. Inside lay a hand-carved wooden ring, crafted by Tommy Weber, who had discovered a talent for woodworking. "I was going to ask you," she said, a blend of shyness and determination in her voice, "to make official what our hearts have known for months." Harrison found himself laughing softly, joy bubbling up irrepressibly as he drew out the diamond ring. "It seems we had the same idea." Sarah's eyes widened at the sight of the ring, understanding its significance immediately. "Catherine's, her, grandmother's, then hers, and now—" He knelt, holding both their futures in his hand. "Now it belongs to the woman who taught me that love can bloom again, even in winter's depths. Who showed an entire valley that judgment can be overcome with compassion. Who made a house into a home again and a wounded man into a father." Tears spilled down Sarah's cheeks as she knelt with him in the garden soil, neither of them caring. "About their clothes, yes," she whispered, "though you should know you're stealing my proposal." They exchanged rings there among the flowers, the diamond speaking of heritage and hope, the wooden band representing growth and renewal. From the greenhouse door came the sound of quiet applause. Mrs. Chen had gathered their family to witness the moment, little Catherine clapping with excitement, though she didn't quite understand why. A garden proposal, Mrs. Chen declared with satisfaction. Most auspicious, new love growing in nurtured soil. She herded everyone inside, leaving the newly engaged couple to share a kiss that tasted of tears and laughter and promises. The rings on their fingers caught the day's last light, one sparkling with ancient fire, one warm with living wood. Different materials, different stories, coming together to write a new chapter in Paradise Valley's continuing tale of love's triumph over judgment. The family portrait hung in the Double H Ranch's main hall, capturing a moment 1 year after Sarah and Harrison's wedding. The photographer had suggested a formal indoor setting, but they had chosen the greenhouse instead. There stood Harrison, and Sarah, little Catherine between them, and Mrs. Chen seated in her place of honor. Around them bloomed the flowers and herbs that had witnessed their love's growth, while through the glass panes, Paradise Valley spread out in sunlit prosperity. Time had brought changes to the valley, each one as gradual and natural as the seasons. Turning, the newly elected town council, led by Clara Peterson, had transformed the community's governance. Where once judgment and fear had ruled, now cooperation and understanding prevailed. The old council ledger had been retired to the town archives, a reminder of darker days and hard-learned lessons. The ranch school had grown into a proper academy, drawing students from neighboring valleys. Sarah's innovative teaching methods, blending traditional education with practical skills and emotional wisdom, had earned recognition throughout the territory. Harrison had donated land and resources for expansion, but it was Sarah's vision that gave the school its heart. Walking Dove now visited regularly, teaching traditional medicine alongside Dr. Matthews in a partnership that would have been unthinkable in the old days. The greenhouse had expanded to include a healing garden, where Western and Native American remedies grew side by side, much like the communities they served. Even Montgomery had found a measure of peace. His wife's involvement in the garden club had slowly drawn him back into community life, not as a leader, but as a neighbor, learning to listen more than speak. The man who had once championed harsh judgment now spent quiet hours helping tend the school's vegetable garden, finding redemption. In simple acts of growth and nurture, little Catherine thrived, her world rich with love and learning. She called Harrison Papa with complete conviction, and if anyone in the valley remembered differently, they kept it to themselves. She had her mother's curiosity and her father's gentle strength, plus Mrs. Chen's gift for bringing people together. The ranch itself had become a gathering place, its boundaries between town and country blurring as Paradise Valley grew into its new identity. The old oak tree, once a site of cruelty, had been transformed. Sarah had suggested hanging a swing from its strongest branch, and now children's laughter had cleansed away darker memories. Thomas Edwards never returned, though he sent occasional letters and gifts for Catherine. Sarah kept these in a special box, waiting for the day her daughter might want to know that part of her history. Harrison had supported this decision with the same quiet understanding he brought to everything, knowing that love secure in itself had no need for jealousy or fear. The family portrait captured all of this in subtle ways. In Sarah's confident pose, so different from the desperate woman who had once been chained and judged. In Harrison's proud smile, the grief of his past healed but not forgotten. In Mrs. Chen's serene presence, representing tradition, adapting to change. And in little Catherine's joyful expression, embodying hope for the future. But perhaps most telling was the small detail many missed. In the portrait's background, just visible through the greenhouse glass, stood the town's new church. Its doors were painted a bright, welcoming blue, and its sign read simply, "All are welcome here." The building represented everything Paradise Valley had learned about true Christian love, not the harsh judgment of the past, but the open-hearted acceptance that Sarah and Harrison had championed. The photographer had captured the exact moment when Catherine, tired of sitting still, had reached up to touch her mother's cheek. Sarah had looked down, Harrison had looked at them both, and Mrs. Chen had smiled her wise smile. In that unscripted instant, the camera had caught something profound. The simple truth that love, given room to grow and courage to bloom, can transform not just a family, but an entire community. Paradise Valley had found its way back to paradise, not through judgment, but through the patient, powerful alchemy of compassion, understanding, and second chances.